Howdy, folks. Making a video here today to start our next unit on this idea of evidence, the type of evidence people use, and appeals, which are how an author basically connects with his or her audience. So the skills that we're going to specifically work on over this unit are, number one, to identify the audience's values, beliefs, and needs. Because in order to really truly address and persuade someone, we've got to understand where they're coming from. Secondly, we're going to identify different types of evidence used. Is this evidence that illustrates or associates or exemplifies something? So we get to learn all those vocab words and how to apply them. We're going to take a look at different types of rhetorical appeals that people use. So appeals to ethos, pathos, or logos, which are credibility, emotion, and logic. And then we also have to note the strategic nature. So like how, not only what is the author doing, but how is the author using maybe an appeal to logic and reasoning to advance their argument? Or how is this author using an appeal to emotion to elicit an emotional response? And how does that affect their readers? And lastly, thing we're going to work on in this unit is the idea of noting sufficiency of evidence. So an author may present evidence to you, but is that enough to truly make their claim? Are they doing enough as a writer to back things up? So the crux of all of this is the audience. To understand the audience is going to give you a direct impact on the persuasiveness of your argument. If I am a teacher and I am extremely knowledgeable and extremely good at my content area, but I'm bad at connecting with my audience, and I end up just teaching straight over their head, even though I have the most knowledge in the world about my subject, which I don't, that's not going to be very effective for my audience, right? If I can't address them where they are, my words are going to be useless to that person, right? So if I'm able to connect with my audience, it's going to prove three things, really. Number one, as a reader, I'm going to be a critical reader, right? If I can read an essay and an article and not only understand who the author is and where the author is coming from, but how his writing or her writing connects to their specific primary or secondary audience. Secondly, it's really going to help me understand that rhetorical situation. If I can take a look at audience and writer and how those connect, that's going to really help my rhetorical analysis. And lastly, this is going to show my sophistication as a writer. So if I have a specific audience in mind and I can address them with some nuance and some complexity and understand where they're coming from, that's going to help my writing ability immensely. So we have to think about when we don't connect with our audience. And if you've ever had this happen in your life, which I'm betting you have, where you've had a disagreement with someone, maybe this is a brother or a parent or an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever, and you guys are talking and you don't feel like that other person is understanding where you're coming from. And if you think about what you feel in that moment, for me, it's these three things. Number one, I get defensive. Like if I don't feel like you're understanding me, I'm going to kind of be on my guard and not necessarily be open to your ideas. I'm just going to dismiss that argument, be like, you're just thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about me as a participant in this conversation. And that makes that arguer's job a lot more difficult. A great example of not alienating your audience is that Mina Shanfar article about being a Muslim and wearing a hijab, right? She could very easily disassociate herself with her audience if she started getting frustrated and angry with them because of all the misunderstandings regarding her religion. But she doesn't, right? She knows the audience she's writing to, and because of that, writes very all-encompassing, right? She's trying to bring people into understanding, not be angry at them for misunderstanding. So a great use of understanding your audience here. To help us do this, to help us connect with an audience, there are three kind of main different types of appeals that we can use. Ethos, logos, and pathos. And these were credited with being coined, not necessarily discovered, by Greek philosopher Aristotle. So the first one is ethos. Ethos basically equates to your credibility or the knowledge of you as a speaker. Because there's a big difference between, a professor or an economist talking about something versus Bill and Ted off the street, right? even though a random civilian could be knowledgeable in this, they don't necessarily have that automatic ethos behind them, that automatic credibility, right? If you don't have the title, or if you don't have a position of leadership or authority, you're going to have to probably work to convince people that what you have to say is valid. And so as you're doing this, as you're writing, you can do this by, number one, writing well, right? If you're presenting yourself as a knowledgeable, educated person, and your syntax and your diction and your proofreading is good, people are going to generally see this and be like, oh, this is at least coming from a well-spoken person, right? Starting to build your ethos. You can also explain your background and your credentials, pull in evidence that you found from your own life and from your own experience. That's a way to build credibility. So say like, I've gone through this, here's my thoughts, right? Because I've been a participant in whatever it is, that helps add to my credibility. But it's also important not to come off as overbearing or like braggy, be like, well, I've done this and I've done this and I've done this, so that's why I can talk about it. I'm right and you're wrong. That's really alienating to an audience too, right? So there's this fine line of how do I build credibility without coming off as pompous. A great example is that Nicholas Wyman article that we read about vocational schools, right? Nicholas Wyman is a CEO of a company that looks at hiring and firing people. So his understanding of vocational schools and how that might affect future employment, totally credible from his perspective. All right. Next one is logos. And logos basically equates to logical thinking or reasoning, right? It's the offering of clear, rational ideas to take your audience and lead them by the hand from point to point to point and say, like, here, this connects to this, which connects to this, which connects to this, by presenting facts and statistics connections. Great example is that New York Times article about felons and the right to vote, right? For a majority, like 3/4 of their paper, they're just focused on, here's a fact, here's what it means. Here's a fact, here's what it means. And then at the end, that's where they kind of pull everything together and say, here's what we need to do about it. Like, if you followed my logic all along, this is the obvious solution. And also in this idea of reasoning and logic, something that we can and should do is address counter arguments, address the people who have opposite perspectives from us, to show that we can logically think about not just one side of an argument, but the other side of an argument. Think about what that does. If I'm having an argument with someone and they don't feel like I'm understanding them, they're going to dismiss my argument. But if I'm having an argument with someone and I can clearly enunciate, like, here's where you're coming from, like, I get it, that could make them more perceptive to my ideas, right? If I can understand them, they might be able to understand me. And we do that through two ways. Either concessions, basically saying, here's the parts of your argument that I agree with. Like, this is not wrong. Good work. And also by refutation, where, like, here are the parts of your argument that I understand, but I do disagree with based on these. And usually you can use a combination of these two to connect, but also not argue for that other side, just saying that you understand that other side. Our last appeal is an appeal to pathos or emotion. So anytime someone is trying to get you to feel something, either positively or negatively, that's an appeal to your emotion. Like, they want you to feel good about this, or they want you to feel scared about this. Think about all the political ads that you've ever seen in your lifetime. Most of them are appealing to your emotion. So they want you to feel great about this guy or terrible about this person, right? They're trying to scare you into this. Usually the ways that we build pathos are some of these traditional English language vocab words, like figures of speech and literary devices and allusions and references, imagery, even just the simple connotations, the types of words that a writer uses can evoke a particular feeling. Like, I can choose negative words to talk about one thing and more positive words to talk about another. And even though, it's just the language that I'm using, that's reinforcing my ideas onto you. Like, so you're associating a negative emotion with part A, but a positive emotion to part B. A great example of this is the 9/11 Bush speech, which is, when you think about it, okay, he's got credibility. He's the president of the United States, but he doesn't spend the entirety of his speech talking about why that makes him credible to talk about this, right? He understands that he's the president. He automatically has credibility to talk about it. So he gets to move on to other rhetorical appeals. And his appeals aren't necessarily logical, right? He's not presenting facts about the attack. He's appealing to people's emotions. He wants to make them feel safe in the wake of this attack. He wants them to feel hopeful and resilient because of this. And he wants to make people not feel scared. Strictly, almost entirely, an appeal to pathos or emotion. And so good writing, good persuasive writing, usually has a balance of all three. You can't just be credible without backing it up with logic and emotion, right? Just because I'm an expert doesn't mean that everything that comes out of my mouth is worth listening to, right? I have to back that up with logic and appeal to, the emotion of what my audience is feeling. Likewise, I can't just present facts and statistics and come off as like cold and scientific. Think about research papers. Research papers are entirely all logic. They're very, very important. But when it comes to the general public, they're not very persuasive because they lack some of that emotion. And likewise, I cannot just appeal to someone's emotion. I cannot just try to manipulate someone into feeling something, because that's definitely seen as kind of divisive. It's seen as propaganda, where I'm using emotions to make you feel this particular thing. Cool. Well, there's a crash course into the three main rhetorical appeals. Good luck, folks.